Good evening. It's Friday, the 31st of October. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Clashes between Palestinians and security forces erupted in the capital and the West Bank today following Muslim Friday prayers as the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound was reopened to Muslim worshippers amid a heavy Israeli security presence. Women of all ages were permitted entrance to the area, but men were restricted to those over the age of 50 in an attempt to prevent violence. The measures were implemented following Wednesday night's attempted assassination of Rabbi Yehuda Glick, who is a prominent advocate of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount, and the killing of his alleged attacker Moataz Hijazi by security forces. Glick remains in serious condition. Israel closed the Temple Mount yesterday to visitors in a rare occurrence in an attempt to ease the situation. But tensions were increased after Palestinian factions called for mass demonstrations in a so-called Day of Rage against Israeli policies. An estimated 4,000 worshippers attended the Friday prayers. After the services, a number of young Palestinians attempted to break through security barricades at the complex, while others launched fireworks and threw rocks at police in the Old City, who responded with crowd dispersal methods. There were also other clashes at the West Bank checkpoint of Kalandia near Ramallah, where dozens of Palestinians hurled rocks at Israeli forces, who responded with tear gas and stun grenades. Elsewhere, a large group of youth tried to block a road leading to Hebron with tires, and they threw rocks and other objects at soldiers. Police also dispersed rioters in the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Abu Tor this afternoon after mass protesters blocked roads and launched firecrackers at them. It's the same neighborhood where the funeral for Moataz Hijazi, who's suspected of shooting Glick, was held late last night. The 32-year-old was shot dead yesterday morning in a gun battle with the police anti-terror unit, who tracked him to his home. The Islamic Jihad terror group identified Hijazi as one of its members, but there have also been reports that he belonged to Hamas. Hijazi served 11 years in prison before being released 2 years ago. Security forces limited the number of mourners permitted to attend the burial to 45 in an effort to keep the peace, and no incidents were reported during the funeral, although minor clashes continued throughout the night. Palestinian residents in Gaza today heeded the call from Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas' Fatah Party and the Islamist Hamas for the Day of Rage. Thousands marched through the streets of Gaza City as part of a mass rally protesting against what they proclaim to be Israel's attempts to Judaize Jerusalem, as well as yesterday's closure of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Many waved Hamas flags and chanted that the Palestinian people will defend Al-Aqsa. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh stoked Palestinian emotions even further by falsely claiming that the Israeli government is seriously considering destroying the mosque by digging tunnels underneath it. In nearby Jabalia, an Israeli flag was laid on the ground to walk over during a protest by the Islamic Jihad, which is demanding that the United Nations and the international world intervene to protect Jerusalem from being Jewish. The U.S. State Department is appealing for all sides to abstain from further violence in Jerusalem and to avoid any changes that would further inflame the current situation.
We condemn yesterday's shooting of a U.S. citizen in Jerusalem. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family. We're in touch with authorities as we seek more information. We're extremely concerned by escalating tensions across Jerusalem, and particularly surrounding the Haram al-Sharif and Temple Mount. It is absolutely critical that all sides exercise restraint, refrain from provocative actions and rhetoric, and preserve the status quo on the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount in word and in practice.
U.S. Secretary John Kerry is reiterating the need for calm from all sides, saying that the only way to resolve tensions between Israelis and Palestinians is for them to come together and negotiate a peaceful settlement. The top American diplomat also commented on the outcry over media reports that an unnamed U.S. official called Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a pejorative term.
I think we need to work quietly and effectively, and we condemn anybody who uses language such as was used in this article that does not reflect the president, it does not reflect me. It is disgraceful, unacceptable, damaging, and I think neither President Obama nor I've never heard that word around me in the White House or anywhere. I don't know who these anonymous people are. We keep getting quoted in things, but they make life much more difficult.
Israel has recalled its ambassador to Sweden after the Scandinavian state yesterday became the first major European Union member to recognize the state of Palestine. The foreign ministry is now also considering the downgrading of relations between the two countries over claims that Stockholm is playing into the hands of the Palestinians and helping them to avoid the compromises required in the negotiation process. Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman called the Swedish decision unfortunate and said that it will only strengthen the Palestinians' unrealistic demands.
Today, the government of Sweden has decided to recognize the state.
When asked about the Swedish decision at a news conference in Brussels, a spokesperson for the European Commission said that the organization intends to recognize Palestinian statehood when it becomes appropriate.
It won't come as a surprise that when I say that the EU's objective is a two-state solution where we would have an independent, democratic, viable Palestinian state living side by side with Israel and its other neighbors in peace and security. In order to achieve this, what is important is that direct negotiations resume as soon as possible. As for the European Union's position on recognition, the EU has said in the past that it would recognize a Palestinian state when appropriate, but the recognition itself is in the competence of member states.
Despite perceived tensions between the Netanyahu and Obama administrations, a summit of Israeli and American security advisors was held in Washington, with the White House pledging that the two nations will maintain unprecedented coordination as nuclear negotiations to prevent a nuclearized Iran advance. The U.S.-Israel Consultative Group, co-chaired by National Security Advisor Susan Rice and her Israeli counterpart Yossi Cohen, met at the White House yesterday, where discussions centered on the ongoing efforts of the P5+1 nations and the European Union to reach a diplomatic agreement with Iran to curtail atomic development. The United Nations Human Rights Committee is calling on Israel to investigate its last 3 conflicts with Gaza and to begin working toward the evacuation of settlements in the West Bank. The appeal came at the end of a UNHRC session in Geneva focused on examining Jerusalem's compliance with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The panel also recommended that Gazan victims of human rights violations be compensated.
We asked the state party to continue to reform its investigative system and to independently and impartially investigate the alleged crimes and see to it that the perpetrators are brought to justice.
The controversial bill on conversion is set to be returned to the cabinet yet again on Sunday. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the coalition are expected to approve a compromise proposal to the bill, which is threatening to bring down the government. The changes in the conversion process will not be voted on as a law in the Knesset, where it's already passed its first reading, but rather will be made directly by the cabinet. In an interview with IBA's Eli Wogelenter, member of Knesset Rabbi Dov Lipman of Yesh Atid explained some of the misperceptions that people have about the bill.
There are 3 elements which people don't understand. Number 1, people don't understand the current situation in Israel and the catastrophe which awaits us if we don't deal with it, and I'll explain. People don't understand that the law itself says nothing about halacha. It's not the Knesset making a decision about Jewish law. And number 3, when it comes to the halachic aspect of it, the parts of Jewish law which those conversion courts will deal with, people don't realize that we're not violating halacha. No one is suggesting that Jewish law be overlooked. It's not a battle of Jewish law versus not Jewish law. It is a battle of being more strict versus being more lenient.
All right, let's take it one by one. You talked about a danger that lies in front of us. What exactly are you referring to in the danger in front of us?
In the 1990s, close to 1 million Russian Jews moved to Israel under the law of return, which allows people who have a non-Jewish mother but have a Jewish father or Jewish grandfather to return to Israel. They are living in our country. They are speaking Hebrew. They have Hebrew names. They attend our universities. They serve in the army. Our children meet their children. There are going to be marriages that come from these relationships. If we don't enable these people to convert, we are talking about an intermarriage en masse. Intermarriage en masse in the state of Israel, Jew and non-Jew. You talk about confusion about who is a Jew. Not addressing this issue is not only a lack of leadership, it's a lack of responsibility, and it's literally yielding to what I view as a tremendous internal threat to the future of the state of Israel.
Regarding Jewish law itself, what is the implication of this bill on halacha? how will it impact Jewish law?
The law does not address halakha at all. The law says that rabbis on a local level can establish conversion courts, and the law emphasizes that that local conversion court must be established by a rabbi who received ordination from the chief rabbinate, number one, and that someone on that court had to have served as a Rosh Yeshiva in either an ultra-Orthodox or religious Zionist yeshiva for at least 10 years. That clause was put in to preserve the fact that we are only empowering rabbis who are going to act within the framework of halakha.
So the argument being given that it's just some local rabbi anywhere doing what he wants is false from the beginning.
There is a lot of false information that's out there about the law. It's worthwhile for everyone to read the law, to understand it. The law does not enable a court to violate Jewish law for the sake of conversions.
What is it about this bill that people don't understand, that people are confused, people don't really get what it's about?
So first of all, the law, like I said before, says nothing about halacha or Jewish law. The law says that local courts will be able to establish conversion courts. Local rabbis can establish conversion courts, and as opposed to it all being under the chief rabbi or the chief rabbinate, which is stringent and distancing in nature, we will allow rabbis who have the courage to be lenient within the framework of halakha to allow these people to convert, and one step further, to actually proactively convert their children. In terms of the technicalities, for a moment on how those rabbis will do that, there's a category in halacha called non-Jews from Zera Yisrael, from Jewish descent. Yes, they are not Jewish. We are not suggesting that they're Jewish. They're not Jewish. They don't have a Jewish mother, and we hold, according to halacha, that it follows matrilineal descent, and no one is debating that.
But they have Jewish blood in them.
They have, it's Jewish descent. They're Zera Yisrael. And the sources, the Tosfos read, for example, one of the Rishonim, says they have Kedushat Yisrael. They have the holiness of Israel in them. It is clear that it's a separate category. Now, we're not saying that they don't have to go through a conversion. They do have to go to mikvah, they do have to have a circumcision, and they have to go through a process. The question is, do they really have to right now be living a full Jewish lifestyle, living with all the 613 mitzvot? And the sources are clear in general that might not be a demand that we have to make. We're not saying there shouldn't be an acceptance of mitzvot, but this idea that it's all or nothing is simply not accurate. The sources are there, and especially when they're from Zera Yisrael, from their Jewish descent, and they want to be part of the Jewish people. And let me add one more point. They are serving in our military. They are willing to die for the Jewish people. What greater statement of I'm part of your nation can there be? It's our obligation as we look towards the future of the Jewish people to be courageous, be lenient, but lenient based on very legitimate sources.
As fighting in Syria continues to rage, the humanitarian crisis is deepening, and all of the involved parties are demonstrating callous disregard for millions of suffering civilians. This from a panel of experts on the situation to the United Nations Security Council during a monthly briefing. One of those providing testimony was UN Syria envoy Staffan de Mistura, who proposed an action plan involving the implementation of several incremental freeze zones and ceasefires where a political process could be started at local levels.
Bottom line, the idea is to take this horrific, horrible trigger that Daesh, ISIS, has been producing in everyone, in the region and in Syria, as a trigger for actually moving forward on what could be some actions on the ground for those who agree that terrorism, which is Daesh, is to be stopped. How? Well, by proposing and seeing whether we can implement some freeze zones or incremental freeze zones in order to make sure that in those areas we will be able then to build first some political process at a local level and then eventually a national level, give some hope to the local population and avoid that the fight which is going on at the moment is actually producing an advantage to Daesh. If that may take place, there are some places which are obvious candidates for that. And one of them, let me be frank, having learned from Kobane is Aleppo. Aleppo has a remarkable situation in terms of tragic. The situation has been constantly under pressure both by the government and by ISIS, does have a standstill, is a place which has a value of iconic value, and at the same time is a symbol in its own, which we hope could become the opportunity of showing that somewhere in Syria, just because everybody feels that there are other priorities, and rightly so, i.e. the terrorist threat, there could be some areas where we can show that some improvement can take place. We will be working on that.
U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel acknowledged at a Pentagon news conference that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad may be benefiting from American attacks on Islamic State fighters in his country. But Hagel insisted that U.S. policy still supports the ruler's removal from power.
As we and the coalition go after ISIL to help the Iraqis secure their government, but also the Middle East, yes, Assad derives some benefit of that, of course. But what we're talking about is a longer-term strategy that's effective in doing what we think, and the people of the Middle East, as to what's required to stabilize and secure that part of the world in effective, inclusive governments.
Turning now to Sweden and the Gripsholm Castle, where Malala Yousafzai has made history again. The 17-year-old Pakistani schoolgirl recently became the youngest ever winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's now the first person to receive the World's Children's Prize and the Nobel in the same year. The Sweden-based organizers say that millions of children around the world voted for Malala, who was presented with the award by Swedish Queen Sylvia. Yousafzai has been a tireless campaigner for education after being shot in the head by the Taliban for insisting on the right of girls to go to school. She immediately announced her intentions to donate her $50,000 prize money to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency toward the reconstruction of schools in Gaza damaged during this summer's conflict with Israel.
This money will totally go to the rebuilding of schools for children in Gaza. So I think it will definitely help those children to continue their education, to get quality education, and it will help them to continue their life and to know that people are supporting them and they are not alone. And I'm really happy that this funding will help in the rebuilding of 65 schools in Gaza.
Turning now to sports, and Maccabi Tel Aviv was working on all cylinders in the EuroLeague last night, romping over Alba Berlin in Germany 84-69. But for former Maccabi Tel Aviv coach David Blatt, the night was not nearly as smooth. Blatt, who is the first Israeli to ever be a head coach in the NBA, lost his first regular season game 95-90 to the New York Knicks. Blatt's Cleveland Cavaliers were playing at home and expectations are sky high. Soon after Blatt signed up as head coach, megastar LeBron James decided to return to the Cavaliers. And since then, a talented squad has been assembled that is expected to challenge for an NBA title. But for this game, at least, that's all appears to be a distant dream, as James struggled in his return, committing 8 turnovers and scoring just 17 points. In local finance, the shekel today put in a mixed performance in foreign currency trading. And due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. Turning to the weather, and October is coming to an end with a downpour over much of the country. Massive thunderstorms and rainfall began to fall last night, with up to 45 millimeters drenching the center of the country, causing flooding in areas such as Ganei Tikva and leading to the closure of a section of Tel Aviv's Namir Road next to the Yarkon River. Magnificent lightning storms were reported to have lighted up the skies over the Negev. The wet weather is also responsible for several road accidents. One person was moderately injured and 3 others lightly hurt when a bus headed toward Givat Ze'ev from Jerusalem slid on the wet road and slammed into a nearby building with its front wheels in the air. The injured passengers were evacuated to hospital, while firefighters extracted the unharmed driver and 2 more passengers from the vehicle. The IBA weather team says that the chilly, wet conditions will continue tomorrow, with unseasonably low temperatures and more isolated storms in the Sharon and the Negev, with a chance of flash floods in the eastern Wadis. Here's the forecast at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope to see you again tomorrow at our Saturday time of 6 p.m. when I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a warm and wonderful evening, and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.